Sarah Martinez had walked through thousands of airports in her career, but never as a passenger, never as someone whose hands shook slightly while approaching security, never as someone carrying a bag full of devices that would trigger every alarm in the building. 6 months ago, she'd been one of the CIA's most trusted operatives. Today, she was just another suspicious traveler, about to discover that retirement doesn't erase your past, especially when your past is classified beyond imagination. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of those who've dedicated their lives to protecting others, often at great personal cost. Denver International Airport hummed with the controlled chaos of modern travel. 34 million passengers pass through these gates each year, each carrying their own stories, destinations, and secrets. But none carried secrets quite like Sarah Martinez, who stood in the ticketing line at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, clutching a boarding pass to Washington, D.C., that represented both a homecoming and a reckoning. At 48, Sarah moved through the world with the careful efficiency of someone who'd spent decades blending into crowds while watching for threats others couldn't see. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the kind of unremarkable clothing that would be forgotten moments after she passed. Jeans, a navy blue sweater, comfortable walking shoes, nothing that would draw attention, which had been her specialty for 23 years. But today was different. Today she was Sarah Martinez, the civilian, not Agent Martinez, the operative. And civilians, she was learning, carry different kinds of burdens. The black canvas messenger bag slung across her shoulder contained items that would have been routine 6 months ago: encrypted communication devices, digital storage units, surveillance detection equipment, tools of a trade she'd officially left behind when she'd signed her retirement papers and walked out of Langley for the final time. But some tools were too valuable to abandon, especially when the world she'd helped protect still contained threats that mainstream law enforcement wasn't equipped to handle. Sarah approached the security checkpoint with the same systematic awareness she'd brought to hostile environments in Syria, Afghanistan, and places that didn't officially exist on any map. She cataloged the TSA agents, 3 at the metal detector, 2 monitoring the X-ray machines, 1 supervisor walking the line with the restless energy of someone looking for problems to solve. Her eyes tracked the positions of airport police, the locations of security cameras, the flow patterns of passengers that could provide cover or create vulnerabilities. Old habits weren't just dying hard, they were refusing to die at all. The line moved forward with bureaucratic inevitability. A businessman ahead of her fumbled with his laptop, earning impatient glances from agents who'd seen the same routine violations thousands of times. A young mother struggled to manage 2 small children while emptying her bag of bottles and snacks. A college student set off the metal detector and endured the secondary screening with the resigned patience of someone who'd clearly been through this before. Normal people living normal lives, protected by systems they took for granted. Sarah's turn arrived faster than she was ready for. She placed her bag on the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector, the familiar weight of concealed electronics making her hyper-aware of every sensor and alarm. The machine remained silent. She'd learned long ago how to carry what she needed without triggering standard detection systems. But the X-ray machine was a different story. TSA agent Rebecca Torres stared at her monitor screen with the focused intensity of someone who'd just seen something that didn't match any pattern in her training. The bag contained shapes and densities that registered as potential threats, devices with components that could be weapons or surveillance equipment or worse. She pressed a button that would change the trajectory of Sarah's morning entirely. "Ma'am, could you step aside, please? We need to inspect your bag." Sarah complied without resistance, moving to the secondary screening area with the calm compliance that had kept her alive in situations where panic meant death. But inside, alarms were sounding. Not the electronic kind, the human kind, the instinctive warnings that came from decades of operating in the shadows where a blown cover could mean torture, death, or worse. Agent Torres opened the messenger bag with practiced efficiency, her expression shifting from routine caution to genuine concern as she began removing items that clearly didn't belong in civilian luggage. A communication device disguised as a smartphone, but containing encryption capabilities beyond commercial technology. A small electronic unit that could detect hidden surveillance cameras. A digital storage device that looked innocent but was actually hardened against both physical and cyber attacks. "Ma'am, what is the purpose of these devices?" Sarah had prepared for this moment, but preparation was different from execution. "I work in corporate security," she replied, which was technically true given her new consulting job. "These are tools for detecting corporate espionage." Agent Torres wasn't convinced. She signaled to her supervisor, Agent Michael Ross, a 20-year veteran of airport security, who developed an eye for situations that required escalation. Ross approached the table where Sarah's devices were laid out like evidence at a crime scene. Corporate security, he repeated, examining a device he didn't recognize but instinctively distrusted. This equipment is pretty sophisticated for standard corporate work. Security threats are sophisticated these days, Sarah replied evenly. The tools have to match the threats, but Ross was already reaching for his radio. In his experience, passengers who carried unidentifiable electronics and remained suspiciously calm under questioning usually fell into one of two categories: very dangerous people or very important people. Either way, they were above his pay grade. Control, I need a federal liaison at Checkpoint Charlie. Possible suspicious devices. Within minutes, the situation escalated beyond standard TSA protocols. FBI agent Jennifer Park arrived first, her no-nonsense approach clearing the area around Sarah's inspection table. Behind her came Agent David Chen from the Department of Homeland Security, whose expertise in terrorist detection methods had been honed through years of tracking threats that most Americans never knew existed. Sarah watched the federal response with professional appreciation. The coordination was smooth, the security protocols appropriate for the perceived threat level. She'd helped design some of these procedures during her years with the agency, back when airport security was adapting to new categories of threats that required new categories of responses. Miss Martinez, Agent Park began, consulting the identification Sarah had provided. I need you to explain the purpose of each device in your possession. Sarah knew she was approaching a crossroads. She could continue with her cover story and likely face hours of interrogation, background checks that would reveal inconsistencies, and eventual detention while federal agencies tried to unravel her true identity. Or she could reveal enough truth to resolve the situation while protecting the classified details that could never be disclosed. Agent Park, she said quietly, I think you should contact CIA headquarters at Langley. Ask for the Office of Security. Tell them you have Agent Sarah Martinez in custody and need verification of her retirement status. The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Agent Park's expression shifted from professional suspicion to sharp attention. Agent Chen stepped closer, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. You're claiming to be CIA? Park asked. I'm claiming to be retired CIA, Sarah corrected. There's a significant difference. Agent Park made the call while Agent Chen maintained visual surveillance on Sarah, who remained perfectly still in the kind of non-threatening posture that nonetheless communicated professional competence. Around them, the airport continued its normal rhythm, but their small corner had become an island of federal investigation. The conversation at Langley was brief, but apparently conclusive. Agent Park ended the call and approached Sarah with an expression that combined respect, embarrassment, and bureaucratic frustration. Agent Martinez, I apologize for the inconvenience. Your credentials have been verified. But Sarah knew the situation was far from resolved. CIA credentials, even retired ones, didn't automatically explain why she was carrying equipment that could be used for surveillance, communication, or worse. And in the post-9/11 world, federal agents weren't inclined to take anything at face value. Agent Martinez, Agent Chen interrupted, your status may be verified, but these devices still represent potential security concerns. We're going to need a more detailed explanation. Sarah looked around the security checkpoint, noting the growing attention from other passengers and airport personnel. What had started as a routine screening was becoming a public spectacle, the kind of exposure that violated every principle of operational security she'd learned over 2 decades in the field. Gentlemen, she said quietly, perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private. The TSA security office at Denver International Airport was designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across gray metal furniture that had clearly been selected for durability over aesthetics. Sarah sat at a metal table across from Agents Park and Chen, her confiscated devices arranged between them like pieces of a puzzle that nobody quite knew how to solve. Agent Martinez, Agent Park began, opening a folder that contained Sarah's hastily compiled background check. Your CIA service record shows 23 years of distinguished service, ending with retirement 6 months ago. But it doesn't explain why you're traveling with equipment that most federal agents don't have access to. Sarah had spent the past hour considering how much truth she could reveal without compromising ongoing operations or violating the secrecy agreements that would follow her to her grave. The calculation was complex. Too little information would extend her detention indefinitely, but too much could expose networks and methods that were still protecting American lives around the world. My retirement from active service doesn't end my commitment to national security, she said carefully. Some threats don't respect organizational boundaries. Agent Chen leaned forward, his expression skeptical. Are you saying you're conducting unauthorized intelligence operations? I'm saying that threats to American security don't disappear when experienced operatives retire, and sometimes those operatives continue to serve in unofficial capacities. Agent Park consulted her notes. The Office of Security confirmed your retirement status, but they were very clear that any current activities would be outside official CIA authorization. That makes you, at best, a freelance operative with access to classified technology. Sarah nodded slowly.
That's an accurate assessment. And at worst, Agent Chen added, someone who's gone rogue with equipment that could be used against American interests. The accusation hung in the air between them. Sarah understood the logic. From their perspective, she was exactly the kind of threat that post-9/11 security protocols were designed to detect. A former intelligence operative with unexplained access to sophisticated equipment, traveling under circumstances that triggered multiple security flags. But she also understood something they didn't, that her 6 months of retirement had been filled with intelligence that suggested a new category of threat was emerging, one that traditional law enforcement and even traditional intelligence agencies weren't positioned to address. Agents, she said finally, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that may exceed your current clearance, but the situation requires disclosure. She paused, making the calculation that would either resolve this situation or complicate it beyond repair. 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by a former asset, someone I'd worked with during my time in Syria. He'd identified a terrorist cell operating in the United States, but with a methodology that doesn't fit standard profiles. They're not using traditional weapons or conventional targets. They're using cyber warfare to attack infrastructure in ways that would cause maximum civilian casualties while appearing to be accidents or system failures.
Agent Park took notes rapidly. Why didn't this intelligence go through official channels? Because my asset doesn't trust official channels. He'd been burned by intelligence leaks in the past, leaks that got his family killed. He would only work with me, and only if I operated outside formal structures. Agent Chen's expression remained skeptical. And the equipment in your bag? Tools for tracking and communicating with a network that operates in the digital shadows. Standard FBI or DHS equipment wouldn't be sufficient to monitor their activities without being detected. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket slowly, telegraphing her movements to avoid triggering defensive responses from the agents. She pulled out a sealed envelope marked with classification stamps that both agents recognized. This contains intelligence on the cell's planned attack on the Denver power grid, scheduled for tomorrow morning during peak usage hours. The attack would cause cascading failures across the regional electrical system, affecting hospitals, emergency services, and water treatment facilities. Agent Park accepted the envelope but didn't open it. Why should we believe this intelligence is legitimate? Sarah's response was interrupted by Agent Chen's phone. He answered, spoke briefly, and his expression changed from skepticism to sharp attention. Agent Martinez, he said, ending the call. That was NSA Cyber Division. They've detected unusual activity in the Denver electrical grid's control systems. Activity consistent with advanced persistent threat methodology. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of airport operations. Sarah watched the agents process the implications, that her seemingly suspicious presence at the airport was actually connected to a real and imminent threat to public safety. Agent Park opened the envelope and scanned the contents, her expression growing more serious with each page. Agent Martinez, this intelligence suggests the attack will be triggered remotely at 8:47 a.m. tomorrow, during peak morning power demand. The timing is designed to maximize systemic failure, Sarah confirmed. A coordinated cyber attack at peak demand would overwhelm backup systems and create the kind of cascading infrastructure collapse that would take weeks to repair. Agent Chen was already on his phone, coordinating with federal cybersecurity teams. Agent Martinez, we're going to need your full cooperation to prevent this attack. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained serious. Cooperation comes with conditions. My asset's identity and methods remain classified, and my involvement in stopping this attack remains unofficial. Why the secrecy? Agent Park asked. Because this cell is part of a larger network that we've been tracking for 8 months. If they realize we've identified their Denver operation, they'll accelerate attacks in other cities before we can stop them. Agent Chen ended his call and turned back to Sarah. Agent Martinez, NSA confirms that the grid vulnerabilities you've identified are real and represent a significant threat. They're requesting immediate access to your intelligence. Sarah stood for the first time since entering the security office. Then I suggest we stop treating me like a suspect and start treating me like an asset, because we have less than 18 hours to prevent an attack that could kill thousands of people. Agent Park closed the folder containing Sarah's background check. Agent Martinez, what do you need from us? Access to a secure communication system and transportation to a location I'll specify. And most importantly, the understanding that what happens next never happened. As the agents prepared to coordinate with federal cybersecurity teams, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her retirement had taken. 6 months ago, she'd imagined a quiet transition to civilian life, perhaps some consulting work that would use her experience without requiring the constant vigilance that had defined her career. Instead, she discovered that retirement from the CIA didn't mean retirement from the war against those who would harm innocent people. It just meant fighting that war without the institutional support and legal protections she'd once taken for granted. But some fights were worth the risk.
And some threats were too dangerous to ignore, even if stopping them meant exposing herself to suspicion, arrest, and the kind of legal complications that could end her freedom as well as her career. The devices in her bag weren't just tools for detecting corporate espionage. They were weapons in a war that most Americans didn't know was being fought in their name, by people they would never meet, in places they would never see. Today, that war had come to Denver International Airport, and Agent Sarah Martinez, retired but not defeated, was about to prove that some secrets were worth keeping and some risks were worth taking. The FBI's Denver field office operated out of a nondescript building that could have housed any government agency or large corporation. But inside its secure communications center, Sarah Martinez found herself at the center of a federal response that was mobilizing resources across multiple agencies to address a threat that few people understood, and even fewer were authorized to know about. Agent Park coordinated with NSA cyber specialists while Agent Chen managed communications with the Denver Police Department and emergency services. Sarah sat at a workstation that provided access to communication networks she'd helped design during her years at Langley, networks that officially didn't exist, but had prevented more terrorist attacks than the public would ever know. Her fingers moved across encrypted keyboards with the muscle memory of someone who'd spent decades navigating digital landscapes where a wrong keystroke could compromise operations and endanger lives. The communication device that had triggered her arrest at the airport was now connected to federal systems, providing real-time intelligence on the cyber attack that would begin in less than 12 hours. Agent Martinez, Agent Park called from across the room. NSA confirms they've identified the attack vectors in the power grid, but they need access to your asset's real-time intelligence to predict the attack sequence. Sarah nodded and activated a communication protocol she'd hoped never to use on American soil. The encryption was military-grade, the routing system designed to hide the identity and location of both parties. Within seconds, text began appearing on her screen in Arabic script that she translated simultaneously for the federal team. "He's confirming the attack timeline," she reported. 8:47 a.m., coordinated strike on 3 substations that will create cascading failures across the regional grid. Estimated duration of power outage, 6 to 8 weeks. Agent Chen looked up from his coordination with emergency services. 8 weeks without power in October? That's a death sentence for anyone dependent on medical equipment, not to mention the impact on food distribution, communications, and basic services. Sarah continued translating the intelligence flowing from her asset. The cell is using malware that's been in the grid systems for months, lying dormant until activation. Standard cybersecurity sweeps wouldn't detect it because it mimics normal system operations until triggered. How do we stop it? Agent Park asked. Sarah's fingers paused over the keyboard. The answer required revealing operational methods that were classified beyond the level of most federal agents. But with thousands of lives at stake, classification levels seemed less important than effective action. My asset has developed a counter-virus that can neutralize the malware, but it requires insertion through the same vulnerabilities the terrorists are using. Essentially, we have to hack the power grid to save it. Agent Chen's expression showed the legal and ethical complexities of the situation. Agent Martinez, you're asking federal agents to authorize what amounts to a cyber attack on American infrastructure. I'm asking federal agents to prevent a cyber attack on American infrastructure, Sarah corrected. The legal distinction might be subtle, but the practical consequences are clear. Agent Park's phone rang with an update from NSA headquarters. After a brief conversation, she turned back to Sarah with an expression that combined relief and apprehension. Agent Martinez, NSA has obtained emergency authorization for defensive cyber operations against the power grid. Your counter-virus has been approved for deployment. Sarah began implementing the attack sequence her asset had developed, her hands moving with the precision of a surgeon operating on systems that controlled the daily lives of millions of people. Lines of code scrolled across her screen as she navigated through digital pathways that led to the heart of Denver's electrical infrastructure. Malware identified, she reported. Beginning neutralization sequence. The next 30 minutes passed in concentrated silence as Sarah and her remote asset conducted what amounted to cyber surgery on systems that couldn't afford to fail. Agent Park monitored federal communications while Agent Chen coordinated with power company officials who were gradually being briefed on a threat they'd never imagined. Counter-virus deployed, Sarah announced. The terrorist malware has been neutralized, but her expression remained tense as she continued monitoring the power grid systems. There's something else. The malware included a secondary payload designed to trigger if the primary attack was detected and stopped. Agent Chen moved closer to her workstation. What kind of secondary payload? Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard as she traced the hidden code through the grid systems. It's designed to cause a catastrophic failure at the primary switching station. Not just a power outage, a complete destruction of the facility that would take years to rebuild. Agent Park was already coordinating with bomb disposal teams. Can your counter-virus stop the secondary attack? Sarah shook her head. This payload isn't software-based. It's designed to physically overload the switching equipment. We need someone on site to manually interrupt the power flow before the overload reaches critical levels. Within minutes, federal agents and bomb disposal specialists were racing toward the Denver switching station, while Sarah maintained digital oversight of systems that were approaching failure thresholds with each passing second. Power levels approaching critical, she reported. We have maybe 10 minutes before the overload becomes irreversible. Agent Chen's radio crackled with updates from the field team. Agents are on site at the switching station. They need to know which systems to shut down. Sarah studied the schematics flowing across her screen, identifying the specific equipment that was being targeted by the terrorist payload. They need to manually shut down Transformers 7, 12, and 15. In that sequence, with 30-second intervals between each shutdown. The next few minutes passed with the kind of tension that Sarah remembered from her most dangerous operations overseas. Lives hung in the balance while technical specialists worked against both clock and circumstance to prevent a disaster that would affect millions of people. Transformer 7 offline, came the report from the field. Power level stabilizing, Sarah confirmed. Transformer 12 offline. Critical threshold avoided. One more shutdown should neutralize the threat. Transformer 15 offline. Sarah watched the power grid's readings return to normal parameters, the terrorist payload neutralized and the threat eliminated. All systems stable. The attack has been prevented. The FBI field office erupted in quiet celebration, the kind of restrained satisfaction that came from preventing a disaster that the public would never know had been threatened. Agent Park approached Sarah's workstation with an expression that combined gratitude and professional respect. Agent Martinez, on behalf of the federal government and the people of Denver, thank you. Sarah logged off the encrypted communication system and disconnected her equipment with the same systematic care she'd brought to the operation. I was just doing my job, Agent Park. Your job ended 6 months ago when you retired, Agent Chen pointed out. Sarah packed her devices back into the messenger bag that had triggered this entire sequence of events. Some jobs don't end with retirement. Some responsibilities follow you regardless of your official status. As she prepared to leave the FBI field office, Agent Park handed her a business card with a phone number and nothing else. Agent Martinez, if you encounter similar intelligence in the future, this number connects directly to our counterterrorism task force. No airport security, no interrogation, no delays. Sarah accepted the card, but her expression remained serious. Agent Park, what happened today is just the beginning. The terrorist network we're tracking has cells in at least 6 major cities, and they're adapting their methods faster than our institutional responses can evolve. Are you saying there will be more attacks? I'm saying there are attacks being planned right now that won't fit the profiles our security systems are designed to detect, and stopping them will require the kind of unconventional cooperation we demonstrated today. Agent Chen considered the implications. Agent Martinez, would you be willing to serve as an unofficial liaison for these kinds of threats? Sarah thought about the question as she slung her bag across her shoulder. 6 months ago, she'd walked out of Langley believing her career in intelligence was over. Today, she'd prevented a terrorist attack while technically being under federal investigation for suspicious behavior. Some threats are too important to ignore, she said finally. And some people are too valuable to waste in traditional retirement. As Sarah left the FBI field office and prepared to return to the airport to catch her rescheduled flight to Washington, D.C., she reflected on the strange trajectory her life had taken. She'd been arrested as a suspected terrorist and ended the day as a counterterrorism asset. She'd been interrogated by federal agents who now had her on speed dial for future crises. But most importantly, she'd proven to herself that retirement from the CIA didn't mean retirement from the mission that had defined her adult life, protecting innocent people from threats they couldn't see coming. The devices in her bag were no longer evidence of suspicious activity. They were tools in an ongoing war against enemies who understood that the greatest attacks were the ones that looked like accidents, system failures, or natural disasters. And Agent Sarah Martinez, officially retired but effectively reactivated, was ready for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an encrypted number. Denver success noted. Chicago needs attention. Same asset, different target. Are you available? Sarah looked at the message and smiled for the first time in weeks. Some retirements lasted forever. Others lasted just long enough to prove that you never really stopped being who you were meant to be. She typed her response, always available for the mission. Because some fights were worth coming out of retirement for, and some people were too dangerous to let retire completely. The war continued, and Agent Sarah Martinez was back in the fight,